Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny and I'm starting off my March reading wrap up today. I finished my first book of the month, and that is By a Lady, Celebrating 3 Centuries of Art by Canadian Women by Maria Tippett. And this is obviously more of a coffee table book, but I was still really interested in or wanting to research Canadian women artists, and so I purchased and read this book this month. And I would say overall, this is a really good beginning of a survey of 3 centuries of Canadian women art. I would say there's probably a lack of diversity to the artists, and I think that's a reflection of the time period that this was written in. It was written in the early 1990s, and so there's a lot that's happened in Canadian women's art since this book was published. But also, I think that the scholarship around finding artists of color, queer artists, and Indigenous artists has gotten better. And so this is, this book is an important moment in time. And the other thing I would say is that a lot of Indigenous artists who live on the land called Canada do not self-identify as Canadians. And so to include Indigenous women artists who live here in Canada on this list in this book is potentially problematic. And similarly with any sort of list that you're compiling of women artists living in Canada, it's important to make sure that they actually identify as Canadian when including them. So this book has a survey. It has, it's interesting. It really kind of shifts greatly from the time period of, the early, figurative artists and their lack of access to getting near the end, where you have artists who are, in just living in such a different time and have access to just different resources. And so the work becomes so diverse and so different and so modern in some ways that it really changes everything. So again, not a typical book that most people would be wanting to read, but I don't believe this book is in print anymore. So I think it's important with these types of books to have a record of them, to know what's in them, because if someone wanted to buy this for some reason, at least you know a little bit about what's in there. All right, I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hi everybody, good morning. I finished The Children of Men by P.D. James last night. This is a future dystopian thriller novel. I'm not exactly sure what genre you should put this into. And there was a film called Children of Men made, I don't know if it was 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, based on this source material. So I was reading this knowing the gist of the story before I started, which I think in this case may have made my experience of reading the novel a little bit less enjoyable because it was very different from the film. But I'm going to be making a Movie Made Me Read It video later on this year, and I will talk more in depth about the comparison between the source material and the film. But as a novel in and of itself, we are following Theo, and it's kind of told in 2 different versions. So we have a narrator for part of it, and then we have Theo's journal entries for the other part of it. And this is actually set in 2021, which is interesting. It was written in 1992, so the crux of the change in our society as we know it is that men stop being able to produce viable sperm, and so no one is able to get pregnant anymore. Babies stop being born, and so that generation of children psychologically become this very precious and overindulged generation that then wreak havoc. It's basically a society in which everyone is aging and aging out, and there's no hope. The society becomes very lacks any sort of motivation to go on in a lot of ways. And a lot of the novel is explaining the psychological effects of this. It is set in England, and there is no longer any sort of royalty or any parliamentary system, and the government's system becomes something called the Warden of England, who just happens to be Theo's cousin. And so the book also really examines the relationship between Theo and his cousin as they were children growing up. The cousin was more affluent and had more opportunities than Theo did. Theo becomes a history professor, and he at one point is advisor to his cousin, who is the Warden of England, and then leaves that position when he realizes that his cousin really is not interested in his advice. And there's some sort of a council as well that it advises the warden. And then the crux of the plot of the novel is that a group of 5 kind of revolutionaries approach Theo because of his connection to the warden, and want Theo to go to the warden and present their demands, or they will begin to commit terrorist acts. But again, that part of the plot is quite mild. There isn't really a huge tension around the revolutionaries. The whole novel has a sense of kind of this detached feeling, because Theo is a very detached person. He kind of lacks any emotion. He's not very passionate about anything. And you could say, well, this is a result of this huge problem that occurs where people are no longer fertile. And so he lacks any sort of engagement in his life, because life doesn't seem worth living when it's not going to perpetuate through the next generation. And I found that part of the novel to be quite, I don't know if boring is the right word, but there was just this ambivalence, and it very much soaked through the whole novel and made it, not very propulsive for me. There's a quote on the front that says, "A book of such accelerating tension that the pages seem to turn faster as one moves along." The first 3/4 of this book is very slow, I would say, in terms of the plot. And it's only near that last quarter where the plot really ensues and something pivotal is happening. But I didn't find it super believable. So there's this love story that happens near the end, which didn't feel believable to me, which felt, like it was thrown in there in order to give some sense of hope. But I didn't find it really made me feel hopeful. I don't know why else the love story was included. I'm being vague because if you haven't seen the movie and you don't know the story, I don't want to reveal the kind of important thing that happens in the plot to push that last quarter of the book through. I think it's better to just, learn that when you're reading the book if you haven't read it before. But again, like I said, I will be comparing the plot to the film, the book and the film in a future video. But in terms of an enjoyable novel that stands on its own, I wouldn't say that this was, for me, my style or a novel that I felt was particularly well executed. I'm not sure if I'll read any more P.D. James. I'm not sure if her writing style is my type of style, meaning that she tends to put in a lot of backstory, a lot of internal dialogue for the main character. For instance, you're going through this situation where they're on the run and they're trying to get somewhere, and you're spending a lot of time discussing like the decision-making process of the person who is doing something kind of propulsive and trying to do something with like a momentum of time. Like time is of the essence, and we're like going through a whole like thought pattern of this person, like why they're picking these things to take with them in the car when they're trying to make a getaway or things like that. And I thought, I don't think that's really necessary. To me, it was too much. It was too many details that didn't really enhance the story or make the plot move or anything. And I guess too, I will say that, for me as a character reader, this style should be one that works for me. I care more about the characters than I care about the plot most of the time. And here I am focusing on the plot, not moving well enough for me. But if you're not going to give me depth with the characters, and you could argue that Theo, being the main character, has a lot of depth in terms of I know a lot about him. But again, he wasn't a sympathetic character. He was an anti-hero, I would say. And so you don't really like him. You don't like, Theo is kind of the lesser of two evils in this novel. And that's a very bleak way to look at a story, So yeah, so it was fine. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad that I know the source material and have read P.D. James, who I'd never read before. But again, not sure if I'd ever read another one of her novels. Not sure if her style is really one that works for me. And yeah, that is The Children of Men. And I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hey everyone. Okay. I finished last night. This is very crooked. We are going to try to fix this view. Okay, so last night I finished The Muse by Jessie Burton, and this was the book club pick for my Patreon book club for the months of January, February, and March. So I would say that for most of this novel, I really enjoyed it. I thought that the plot moved really well, even though it was dual timeline, which can sometimes be challenging with the plot. We had Odell Bastian in London, 1967, who is an immigrant from the Caribbean coming to London, and she also is an aspiring writer, working at a gallery/museum type place, where she encounters a very mysterious coworker named Marjorie Quick. And she meets a man who's bringing a painting in to be potentially appraised and sold. And then we have Spain in the just leading up to the Civil War in Spain. I believe it was 1936. And a young woman who is an aspiring painter, her parents, and a sister and brother who are from the Spanish countryside. They are English and German, who come to live in a villa, and they encounter this brother and sister, one of whom is wrapped up in the political aspect of the day, and the other of whom is just looking for companionship, looking for acceptance, looking for a chance to rise above her circumstances. And so the plot ensues with us learning snippets through each section, and there's these paintings, and they're mysterious. So this painting is connected to other paintings. This painting that a young man brings to the art museum is connected to the family, and you kind of learn things from the two timelines, how they relate to each other 30 years apart and what's happening. And I think that overall Jessie Burton did a good job with that. Unfortunately for me, near the end, it sort of fell apart. So I think that this is the risk that authors take when they decide to weave stories like this. You're weaving in mysterious circumstances, you're weaving in mistaken identities or mysterious identities, and the payoff for each reader is not going to necessarily be equal. And for me, when the kind of final mysteries were revealed, they left a bit to be desired for me, unfortunately. So I wasn't really happy with the kind of big climactic reveal. I felt that it just divulged into kind of cliches and didn't enhance my enjoyment of the novel, but kind of made the experience of reading the novel go downward instead, unfortunately for me. The other thing I think that is important to recognize, which in 2016, when Jessie Burton wrote this book, was not as prominent in the literature conversation, at least not in the circles that I was circulating in, is that Jessie Burton is a white British author writing about a Black woman's experience. And I think, for obvious reasons, this is problematic on some level. And I did listen to read one review in which she mentioned that making Odell a Black woman at this time was not in any way connected to or affecting of the plot. I think the only thing that she used it for was to make Odell an obvious outsider, which Teresa, one of the other characters, was also an outsider, but it's a very loose connection. And so if Jessie Burton was doing this out of a sense of diversity or out of a sense of trying to be more broad in the characters she's writing about, I understand her desire to want to do that. But again, when you're talking about lived experience, when you're talking about who has the right to tell what stories, did Jessie Burton have the right to tell a story like this about Odell? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. My gut tells me that she really didn't. So that's where I land with The Muse by Jessie Burton. I think overall, like I said, I was highly entertained by the book and I thought it was well written. I don't know if I would read more of Jessie Burton, because another review I read kind of said that this was similar in plot to The Miniaturist. So if she has a device that she likes to use in terms of her plot twists, and these are her devices, I might not be in for another one, because I think certain writers choose a certain style that they want to continue writing with. I noticed this with another author that I was reading who used a certain plot device in two of the novels that I read of hers, and I read them fairly close together, and I felt like there was a strange echo in the stories, and I thought, why would you do that? These are two really different characters having two really different experiences. Why echo this one plot point? And I came to realize that some authors just do that's a thing that they want to keep exploring maybe in their writing or something like that. And so that kind of can lead to me kind of being out. So this other author who was repeating a trope, I'm going to give her another chance, one more chance, because I really enjoyed several of her novels overall. And if it emerges, sorry, it's late. Sorry for the yawn. If this plot point emerges again in another novel that seems to be unrelated, just like the other two, I think I will cease to read her books. So this is just kind of, as a reader, when you're exploring the things that you like and the things that you don't like, you kind of have to, decide, how far an author will take you down a road. There is a plot device in here that I really dislike in books as well. It didn't make me angry in this one as it has in other novels that I've read. I just kind of was like, oh. So it was kind of like a resignment to it. I wasn't angry about it, but in a previous novel I've read, it made me angry. And I'm sorry that I'm being vague, but if I reveal what it is, then I'm spoiling the book to you, basically. Because you go through the whole book not knowing this. And so you kind of have to not know in order for the book to like propel you through. So again, there's these payoffs sometimes, and then the payoff, like you go through this book, you're reading through the mystery, you don't know what it is, and then when you get to the end, sometimes it's satisfying and sometimes it's not. And for me, this ending was not particularly satisfying. So, but I'm excited to discuss this with my book club people. I would say this is a good book to discuss in a book club because there's a lot in here. There's a lot in here to discuss. So there's that bonus to it. Okay, so I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hey everyone. I just wanted to wrap up Uninvited, Canadian Women Artists in the Modern Movement, edited by Sarah Milroy. Sorry, I kept forgetting her name. I'm just going to briefly talk about this because this book is the catalog for an exhibition of the same name, and it was shown in 2 different galleries or 3 different galleries a few years ago, and I went to see this exhibition, and it moved me quite a bit as a Canadian woman artist who is known, locally to a certain degree, but certainly not to a level of recognition that a lot of artists would strive for. And a lot of the women that were in this show worked away during their careers, during their lives, at making their art with moderate to, in some cases, little to no success. So I just found this exhibition and the book, which is, has very short essays in it. So it has the main essay that accompanies the exhibition by the curators, and then it has a whole bunch of assembled essays about different artists and their work that was featured in the show, but not every single artist, I don't think, was in here. But I think that it's a wonderful testament to the breadth of work done by Canadian women artists. And this is, in the modern movement, is considered to be kind of the 1920s through the 1940s, I believe. So there was a lot of diversity to what they show, but again, they're still working on this history, and they're still trying to find a lot of women who were put into obscurity because of the lack of interest in women's work at that time. But uncovering this history was super important. So yeah, I would say that, we're featuring artists here who were working from, the early 20th century through the 1960s, I think. So, yeah, that is Uninvited, Canadian Women Artists in the Modern Movement. It's a beautiful, big book, and I will check in again with you when I have finished my last book of the month. Hi, everybody. So I finished Days of Light by Megan Hunter just now, and I've filmed a Fresh Reads reading vlog about this one, so I'm not going to spend as much time here wrapping it up. But this is loosely based on the kind of lifestyle of some members of the Bloomsbury group, namely Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant, but it's not really about them. This is a fictional story that kind of uses that scenario of the lifestyle that they had to create a fictional world based around Ivy, who is the daughter of Marina and Gilbert, but Gilbert and Marina don't live together. Angus lives there. Angus and Marina are artists. Ivy and her older brother Joseph are coming of age at the beginning of the story in 1938, and then this book follows 6 days in Ivy's life, very pivotal days that change her. And I think at the end of the book, appreciated the last day, the second to last day, the best. I think it showed the possibilities with Megan Hunter's writing, but I felt like other parts of the book were lacking for me in terms of their emotional impact. And so if all of the book would have made me feel the way that chapter felt, then this potentially could have been a 5-star read. But that section of the chapter kind of brought it up to a 4 for me, but before that it was very much a 3. I just felt it missed the mark for me on a lot of the things that I would have expected a book with this sort of theme to deliver. So anyway, if you're interested in finding out more about this book, then please have a watch of my reading vlog. And yeah, I realized the other day, or just now, that I actually still have my audiobook left to finish for March, so I will check in again with you when I had finished my audiobook. Hey everyone. All right, so I just wanted to wrap up my last read of March, and that was Indigenous Rights by Jessie Vowel. This book, I think, is described several times in the text as kind of a primer for people to get a baseline for Indigenous issues, and I think the book does that very well. Unfortunately, I listened to it on audio, and it has this style that I'm not really sure works for me in terms of audiobooks that I think this is maybe the second or maybe third audiobook that I've listened to that has done this with the end notes, but they decided to put the end notes at the end of each chapter rather than at the end of the book. And I do find that a really disjointed way to listen to a book because, to begin with, it's really hard to really connect end notes with their reference in the text that you've just listened to, because you're listening to it, you're not reading it. So that's one issue. And the next issue is that you have to listen to 10 minutes of someone reading out website addresses and citations, which is, just very tedious to listen to. So that is the only reason why I would say, if you do want to read this, I don't recommend the audiobook. Obviously, if you have to listen to the audiobook because of visual impairments, then I would say, you can just do what I did, which is kind of scroll or get past the end notes at the end of each chapter, but it's not ideal as a way to read this book. In terms of the content, it is almost 10 years old, this book. And unfortunately, a lot of the information is still perfectly pertinent to today. I think there have been some changes in the last 10 years in Indigenous issues in Canada, and that's what this book is specifically referring to. So there would be, some updates to some of the policy that they talk about, some of the governmental organizations and how they've progressed or not in terms of relationships with Indigenous with First Nations, with Indigenous issues across the country, such as DRIPA being implemented in British Columbia, which is now under threat, and some different things that were specific to the first Justin Trudeau Parliament, which have changed rather drastically in the last 10 years. So, but I think in terms of getting a baseline for a lot of Indigenous issues around land rights, around perception, stereotypes in popular culture and Canadian society in general, this is a really good book to read for people who are not familiar with what is going on with Indigenous communities, around water access, around the Indian Act, many different things, many different parts of Indigenous lives. And a lot of Jessie Vowel addresses a lot of these things in a very straightforward and often actually sarcastic manner, on purpose to help a settler reader, a non-Indigenous or First Nations person, understand a lot of the issues that are still ongoing today in Canadian society that need to be addressed in order to create a just and equal community for First Nations, Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples. So I would encourage you to read this book if you are looking for that information. Like I said, there are a lot of endnotes and footnotes in this book, which I think will also be very helpful if you want a reference point from which to base your learning. And that is the reason why I read this book, so that I could know whether or not it's a good book to recommend to people going forward around these issues. So I would recommend it. I applaud Jessie Vowel for doing the work that she did to put this work together. Okay, so that is my reading for March, and I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.